Well, hello and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire. Today I'm sharing with you a technique that's very quick to do and very simple, and I call it paint dragging. Now, there may be an official name for this, but I'm not sure, so this is what I'm going to call it today. And I find that it's a great way to create beautiful backgrounds for your stamping. Now, I will say that I was somewhat inspired by an amazing artist that I follow on Instagram named Josie Lewis, and I'll link to her below. She does lots of different forms of art, and most of them are rainbow, and I've seen her do things kind of similar to this, so be sure to check out her wonderful work. I'm going to start the video by showing you a bunch of backgrounds that I created with this technique. Then we'll turn them into cards, and I have some additional tips and techniques for using die cuts and other things for simple card designs. Okay, so for this technique, you just need some acrylic paint. You could use any acrylic paint you may have on hand. The ones that I reach for are some new ones that I got because my kids like to paint rocks. So I had these on hand, so that's what I used. I'll link to the ones that I use below. I like the color mix that the package comes with. So I'm putting drops of the paint down on one side of some white cardstock. I kind of like to make sure that the drops touch each other, and you don't want too much paint or you'll end up with a mess. If you want to, you can kind of mix the colors together where they meet so you get a better blending, but I'll show you that you really don't have to do that. At this point, I was experimenting. Next, we're going to drag something flat through this paint. You could use a credit card for this or a side of an acrylic block. I'm using this L-shape MISTI Creative Corner. It's something that you normally use in a MISTI stamping tool, but it just was a great shape to drag through the paint. And I'll show you a little bit more about that later. Now you can drag through the paint once or go back and forth as I did. You'll still have paint on whatever you're dragging through this that you can take and do additional backgrounds. And you'll see I actually like the second one better. Sometimes I find that it has better blending between the colors, but check out how you quickly and easily can create several backgrounds with just a few drops of paint. So I went ahead and set that aside to dry, and I'm going to show you a bunch more examples. Now, as I mentioned, you can drag different things through the paint. I really like that L-shape creative corner because it kind of has a handle on the side, but any acrylic block like these would work also. You could even use like an old gift card that has expired. So here's another example using very similar colors, and each time you get kind of different results. Now I'm dragging the paint straight across, but you could definitely do like a wave pattern or like a scallop pattern, anything you want. If you find there's one that you're not really thrilled with, like this one that doesn't cover the entire background, keep it because you can die cut beautiful shapes out of these. Now I will say that you don't need a lot of paint for this technique. In fact, I probably have a little bit too much down here. You can see that it wants to kind of drip off of my creative corner. But by putting the extra bit of paint down, I'm able to get 3 backgrounds out of each process. If you want to use a little less paint, you could maybe get 2 backgrounds. But the second and third pass with the paint are my favorite, so that's why I like to put more down. Now in this example, I'm not going to mix the colors together next to each other, just put down the drops, right away drag right through it, and check out that beautiful stripe look that I get with one pass. Now you'll see I had a little bit too much paint, it's dripping off, but that's okay. I'm able to get a couple more passes with the paint dragging across the paper. So I end up with some beautiful pieces that'll be great for backgrounds. I went and I made a bunch of backgrounds. I probably did maybe 40 backgrounds. Lila and Colin did some too. So I'll have them on hand for lots of cards to make. Here's one again where I didn't mix it first in between the drops of paint. And you can see that it ends up just giving beautiful results no matter what. The really fun thing about this is that each time the results are a little different. And also within minutes, you can create 3 pieces that you can use for multiple cards. And also you can use pretty much any colors you want. I like that kind of blended look, so that's why I use like kind of a rainbow order when doing it, but it's totally up to you. You can also put your paint directly onto a flat edge. Here I'm using an old gift card just to show you that it can be done with this, and then dragging it to the paper. It really doesn't matter which way you start. I kind of prefer putting the paint on the paper because that way I can control it a little bit better. Keep in mind you can also do fun movements as you go across instead of just straight across. Here I'm going to kind of do a fun little wave. Sky is the limit with this, so I encourage you to experiment and see what you can come up with. This time I'm going to use a large acrylic block to show how that works. So you could do a lighter drag through the paint and end up with more vibrant results, but I like to put a good amount of pressure down so I can really squish that paint across and get a beautiful blend. There I did a fun scallop motion and I just love those results. You can also do rainbow effects. When you do this, you want to spread the color out a little bit more because you'll see after the first swipe, which turned out really well, the colors blend together the next time. I had a little bit too much paint on there, so the pink kind of gets lost, but you can definitely create beautiful rainbow effects. I mostly did blues and purples today along with reds and yellows because I wanted to do some sky scenes. You can also create really cool looks by just putting drops of paint across your paper and then dragging through that. And check out this result. It's just a unique one. I didn't actually use this panel today, but I'm definitely going to save it. Thought it'd be fun for an ocean. Then your second and third pass are really beautiful also. Got a little carried away with the paint there, a bit too much. But you can just keep going and taking some of that paint, dragging it across, and I ended up getting a bunch of beautiful ocean-like backgrounds out of that one. Here's another one with some drops of paint. I added a lot of paint on the left too. And watch this. So cool. This would be fun for a really playful card, maybe a birthday card. And then you have lots of paint on your little creative corner here that you can drag on to some additional pieces. Again, I kind of got carried away with the paint, so you can definitely use less. But really, this isn't that much, considering how many backgrounds I get out of it. Another great thing about this technique is it dries very quickly since you're really using a very thin layer of paint. So here I'm just going to show you a bunch of different examples I made, playing around, some Lila made also. Now usually the first pass through gives you more distinct lines, and then the additional passes give you more of a blended look. Today I'm mostly going to stick with the softer ones because I'm using them for sky backgrounds, but I'll save the other pieces for future projects. Okay, so let's start making some cards. I have a lot of techniques to share with you along the way. And all of the cards feature some new products from Hero Arts. The first is this kit. This is the Hero Arts July My Monthly Hero Kit. It has a large 6x8 stamp set. Then it has the coordinating dies and even a background die, some inks and other things. The nice thing about this kit is its cost is half the value, so it's a really good deal. And I'll be using this today. And I'll show you lots of creative things that you can do with that background die. I'll also be using this new stamp set from Hero Arts. I wanted to give you a close look because there are lots of fun images in this one. So all of my stamping will come from these two different products. Let's get started with the first example. This one happens to be the most complicated of all of them, so I thought I'd start here. For this one, I created kind of a shaker box, which you'll see in a moment. Now I have this large rectangle die, but I wanted it to be not as tall. So I'm going to do a trick with it. I'm just taping it temporarily onto the front of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white cardstock panel. I'm going to partial die cut this. So notice that the cutting plate doesn't cover the rectangle completely. Only the things under the cutting plate will cut. So only that bit of the rectangle will cut. The rest will not cut. So we'll have a partial die cut. This way I can shift the rectangle die to make my rectangle smaller. Now you could use a craft knife and a straight edge to cut this rectangle window, but I think this is much easier. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut some of that rectangle away and that is partially die cut, just so I can easily see where to line up the die. So I'm taking the same die, lining it up with the edges of where the cut is already, but notice I've shifted my rectangle die. I'm going to put tape on that again, and I'll do partial die cutting. Only what's under this top cutting plate will cut, so the rest of the die will cut there. Okay, so when I take this out, you'll see that I have a rectangle window that is smaller than the rectangle die I had. I didn't have a rectangle die that was narrow like that, so I had to do it myself. Next, I'm taking that piece and I'm just tracing the corners onto my painted background so I would know where to put my stamping. This is a MISTI stamping tool. It just helps with good stamping, but you could use an acrylic block if you want. And I'm going to line up this stamp from that Hero Arts My Monthly Hero kit right along those pencil marks. And I'm going to stamp this with black VersaFine ink. I use my anti-static powder tool first, and I'll stamp this with the ink, and then I'll add clear embossing powder so that I'll have a nice black image that's solid with some shine to it. After I heat set that, I'm going to put my paper back into the MISTI, use the same stamp, but this time I have it upside down. The reason I'm doing this is I want the ground to be a little bit deeper on this. So by using the back of the stamp, I can stamp a large area of solid black underneath the ground. So I'm just making my ground a little bit deeper so that when I put the window up to it, I can see more of the ground. So I'm adding some clear embossing powder to that, and there you'll see that the ground is deeper. Don't worry about the mess on the bottom. We'll cover that up with our little die cut window we created. So here you can see how more ground is showing. You could have just dragged an ink pad to do that if you wanted to. I added a sentiment to the front. This is Happy Birthday from the Hero Arts Birthday Messages stamp set. On the back, I'm adding some double-sided tape around the window. Next, I'm putting a piece of acetate that I had from some packaging, and I'll put that right over the tape. So now we have a clear window for the front of our card. Next, I trimmed down my background to be a little bit bigger than the window itself, and I'm using some strong adhesive and some Lucy's Cards gems, just to have some clear gems floating in the background. That glue will dry clear. Now on the back of our window, I'm putting lots of foam tape, lots of foam tape, making sure to put a closed frame around our window so we can put some shaker goodies inside. Now I'm going to put the little shaker bits on top of our little stamped piece towards the center. Now I will put down a bunch here. Don't put as many as I did because I ended up going back in and taking a bunch out. You just need a pinch of little gems or a pinch of little sequins here. That's it. This is way too much. So now I can take my window piece that has that foam tape and just lay it right over it. And then we have a shaker box window. And I can glue that to the front of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card. So as I mentioned, I did take some of those little shaker goodies out, so you can see there's just a little in there. And what I didn't do is use an anti-static powder tool on that window. I like when my little glitter and sequin bits stick to the window from the static because then they float. If you don't want that floating look, you can use an anti-static powder tool on the acetate before putting your little gems and sequins in. But I like the look of them floating. And here you can see how that paint background that we created was a perfect backdrop for simple stamping. Here's another example of a shaker card that I created with one of my painted backgrounds. This time I created a circle window for my shaker using a circle die. And I put even more little confetti pieces in it. And you'll see they all fall down to the bottom. If you don't want the static on your acetate, just use an anti-static powder tool or a dryer sheet, but I like when they kind of float along. Here's another example using black simple stamping on a painted background, and I'm going to show you a trick you can do with background dies. So I black heat embossed these images from the same Hero Arts My Monthly Hero kit right onto a painted background. You'll see me here use a creative corner, that's that triangle shaped piece in my MISTI. It helps you position your paper in your MISTI, and that's what I happen to use to drag through my paint earlier in this video. So they do serve several purposes. So here you can see the black embossing against the painted background. The rest of my cards today feature this background die from that same My Monthly Hero card kit. Now this die cuts beautifully, and you end up with a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch piece with that focal point in the center. Well, on this card, I'm going to show you how to move that focal point up, but still keep that sun ray effect. So I'm taking the die and taping it temporarily onto a piece of white cardstock that's a little longer than what I need. I'll put this in my die cut machine, and again I'll do partial die cutting. So you'll see that the plate doesn't cover it completely. A little bit of the die is hanging out the bottom there. So only the things under the plate will cut. That bottom edge will not cut. So after I run that through my machine, everything will cut except that bottom edge. And I can use my scissors to extend those rays on the bottom. This is easy to do, doesn't take much time, and just one of the many ways you can really get a different look out of your background dies. I'm going to show you a bunch of things you can do with this particular die in today's video. So after I've trimmed all of those rays to be longer at the bottom, I decided to go ahead and trim off the frame on the sides too, just so that I'll have that center with rays coming out and no frame around it. But you could definitely leave the frame on it if you wanted to. After I've finished all of my trimming, I'm using some strong liquid adhesive to glue this on to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. Now the rays you'll see are super long on the bottom, so I can put the focal point towards the top of the card, which is really what I wanted for this card design. Then once it's dry, I can trim the excess off. In the meantime, I'm adding our little stamped panel to the card with a piece of white craft foam between it. You could use foam tape, but I find white craft foam ends up holding up through the mail better. It's cheaper and it's very quick to do. I like to put my MISTI over a card while it's drying. Okay, so here is the final card. I added some simple sequins here and there to the background. You can see in the background I have those rays coming out from the stamping, but I did white on white, so it's very subtle, so it doesn't distract from the stamping, but instead draw attention to it. You can see our beautiful blended painted sky and the nice heat embossing right on top. So that's one way you can stretch your background dies, is by doing partial die cutting. Okay, my next examples are very simple. In this case, I did heat embossing on die cut shapes. One of the things I really like to do with these painted backgrounds that I created is just die cut a shape out of the area that I like the most. Here I'm starting with the stamping, but you could definitely do the die cutting first. I've put it in my MISTI and I'm stamping with VersaMark Ink some of the images from the Hero Arts My Monthly Hero Kit. You could use an acrylic block if you don't have a stamping tool. This time I'm adding white embossing powder and heat setting it. So you can see you can stamp on this beautifully. I do like the look of heat embossing on it. Okay, here's one where I did the die cutting first. I die cut a circle from one of my backgrounds. I arranged some images from the Hero Arts Ornate Carousel stamp set that I showed you earlier. Always use your anti-static powder tool first. Stamp with VersaMark ink, and then you can add white embossing powder. So you can see how you can quickly make a lot of backgrounds, die cut an area out of it, and add your stamping. For this one, I wanted a little shimmer. One option is to spray it with a shimmer mist, and then just dab off the excess. And that'll dry beautifully on the acrylic paint, and you can see the sparkle that you have there. For the background, I used that Starburst die that's included in the kit that I used on the last card. My next example also shows white heat embossing on our painted background, but I wanted to show you a trick that you can do with that background die. I'm taking one of the background die cuts and temporarily taping it to the front of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. So just 2 little pieces of tape on the side. In the open rays, I'm putting a little liquid adhesive. Over on the right, I have the die that I've run through my die cut machine with some white shimmer cardstock. I'm popping out each of the rays and gluing them in the open areas on my card. So that piece that we taped onto the front of our card is just there as a guide to know where to put the die cut pieces. Once I have them all glued in, all the rays, I can carefully remove that negative space, and we have these raised rays on the front of my raised rays on the front of my card. Now I still have that negative space that I can use on another card. This keeps all those little pieces from going to waste and gives a completely different look. So to finish off the card, I just glued that embossed piece right in the center. And you can see how the white shimmer cardstock adds a little bit of interest to the background. Instead of just being white on white, it's white shimmer on white. I'll link to the cardstock that I used, but you can make your own by just spraying white cardstock with a shimmer mist. Here are a couple other cards that I used with a very similar technique. You can see the background was done the same with the white shimmer paper. In the center, I used an oval die instead, and I used some images again from that My Monthly Hero kit. Now, since I had those stamps on my MISTI to stamp on that oval, I went ahead and die cut some more ovals from my painted backgrounds and stamped the same thing on them. That way I could make a bunch of cards at once. And notice on these two cards, they have one background that I die cut. One has the negative space and one has the little bits and pieces glued down. This next one, for some reason, is my favorite. I just really like the colors on it. I did add more shimmer onto this one using a Tonic Aqua Shimmer pen. If it's a little too much, you can wipe a little bit of it away with a baby wipe. Okay, so our next examples show another way to use that background creatively, and this is super fast and simple to do. I die cut the background from some white cardstock, and next I'm taking a large circle die and placing it right in the center. When I run it through my die cut machine, I end up with this little sunshine that I can put behind one die cut, and then I also have the negative space that I can use on another card. So here are two that I did with the circle die cut sunshine, and I just put a circle stamped panel right in the center. I did use foam tape behind that to make sure that it stood up a little bit so that you could see the white on white a bit better. Now remember, I still have the rest of the background die cut, so I used that on this card. You can see that circle was cut away from the center, and it makes a nice frame for this circle that I cut with the stamping on it. So you can use all these bits and pieces in many ways to get different card designs. Okay, there are lots of ideas for you. I hope you'll try this paint dragging. It really is easy to do. If you're interested in the supplies, I link them below in my YouTube description. In the middle are a couple other videos you might like. Thank you so much for spending so long with me today. I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you soon.